You write about these ancient Greeks, Aristotle, Hecuba, Antigone, Creon, as if they were next-door neighbors.
I think I've lived with them for a long time, and I guess I think that the big problems that those great works put in front of us haven't changed all that much, and that the Greek works face them head-on with a courage and an eloquence that I don't always find in modern works on moral philosophy.
Great problems. What kind of problems?
Take the problem of moral conflict. Now here you have, in Aeschylus' Agamemnon, a king who's trying to do his best. He's trying to lead his army, and he's following the commands of the gods, leading his army off to Troy. And suddenly, he finds that his expedition is becalmed, he can't move forward, and he's told that the reason is that the gods are demanding a sacrifice. He's got to sacrifice, he's got to kill his own daughter in order to complete that expedition. So here we have two deep and entirely legitimate commitments that he has in his life coming into an absolutely terrible conflict in which there's not anything he can do that will be without wrongdoing. And at that point he says, thinking about this, and the play says with tears in his eyes, heavy doom is disobedience, but heavy too, if I shall rend my own child, the pride of my house, polluting my father's hands with streams of slaughtered maiden's blood close by the altar. Which of these is without evils? Now, I think this idea that often when we care about more than one thing and care deeply, the very course of life will bring you around to a situation where you can't honor both of the commitments, and it looks like anything you do will be wrong in some way, will be perhaps even terrible in some way, that this is true.
You think it's true for the taxi driver out there on the street right now? He doesn't see himself as a king making those awful, horrific choices. Life doesn't present itself to him that way.
Oh, but I think it does on a smaller basis. That is, these things happen every day so long as you care deeply about more than one thing. I mean, just take a person who works, who has a career, who also has children, and who has to juggle every day those two responsibilities. Well, nothing will guarantee that in some event that you can't prevent from arising, you're just going to have to neglect one of those commitments and neglect something that's really, really important because the very course of life has produced a terrible conflict. I face this every day myself.
Personally?
Well, personally, as a mother who has to juggle career and child raising, I find so often, just at a very mundane level, you've got a meeting and your child's acting in a school play. You can't do both things, and it's not simply that you can't do both, but whatever you do, you're going to be neglecting something that's really important.
But we were taught to rank obligations, to, the old term, choose priorities, and not to make of every conflict of competing goods a great moral drama.
There's nothing illogical, it seems to me, about saying, I am going to care deeply about my work and my writing. I'm also going to care deeply about my family, my child. It's only somebody who's trying to evade the recognition of what's actually happening who's going to say, oh, look, I'll rank my obligations and I'll decide, oh, well, in this situation, it's the work that takes priority, so the other one just drops out, and it's not only not a duty, it's contrary to duty. I mean, that isn't what real people do, and I think it's also not what good people do.
Good people?
No, I mean, that is, suppose you had a person who in that situation would really say, oh, well, given that work comes in here, I'm not going to care about my daughter. I don't care if I go off to that school play or what have you. I think that's a callous person, a person who doesn't feel what it is to love something. And I think if you really feel what it is to love someone or some commitment and be bound to that, then when a conflict arises, you will feel deep pain. And you will feel what Agamemnon felt, even at a smaller level. You will feel which of these is without evils. And I think Agamemnon pretty clearly has to sacrifice his daughter. still, he has not got the right to think, just because he's made the right choice, all is well. In fact, in the play, he does say, may all be for the best. And the chorus says that he's mad.
One of my favorites is Antigone and the conflict between her loyalty to her family. I must bury my dead brother even though he's been a traitor to the state. And Creon's loyalty to the state, to the welfare and protection of the whole society. Sadly, they all end up dead. No one comes to peace with that conflict.
And yet, Creon, by the end of the play, has seen something that he didn't see before. Because all through the play, he defines enemies as anyone who opposes the good of the city, even if it happens to be a member of his own family. The claim of the family just doesn't exist for him. But then, by the end of the play, the fact that his son has died and that does mean something to him, that has come forward, and he now says that his deliberation has been very bad.
I saw Antigone with a clarity that I had never imagined possible when I watched Lyndon Johnson pursuing the war in Vietnam, which he thought absolutely right to do for the sake of the state, refused to stop his two sons-in-law from going, knowing that their death there could be a personal blow indescribable. I saw the torture of the conflicting loyalties there.
The sad thing is that he didn't learn enough from that, perhaps. He didn't see quickly enough what that meant for families in America generally.
Do you think Creon saw, and did he do something about what he saw, or was the seeing of it, was the realization, the recognition enough?
Well, up till then, he thinks of the state somehow as though it doesn't consist of families, and he keeps talking about the city, but he forgets that what does the city consist of? It consists of families who love their children and who are torn apart by civil war and who have relatives on the opposing side. And he won't see the state in complex enough terms. By the end of the play, I think he's on the verge of doing that. He's ready to do that, but it's too late.
You've just said something that I think is very important, that what these moral conflicts reveal is the truth of reality, personality behind the abstractions. If you think of the state without thinking of the family, you're thinking of something abstract that enables you to do what you would never do as a ruler if you thought of the human beings behind those abstractions.
Yeah, and I think in general the Greeks were on the right track when they thought that what we're aiming at in political life is to produce a good life that is very complex, that has many different elements, but we have to look at each one of them.
Let's take an example. You have written that these ancient Greeks were preoccupied with the notion of a livable life. Now, what do you take that phrase to mean, a livable life?
Well, I think it means, first of all, that they are preoccupied with the idea of a life that has many different parts. That is, a life that is rich and full, that involves many different activities. Now, it also turns out that these activities are not entirely under people's control at all times, that a lot of them, like the ability to love and care for a family, the ability to get an education, the ability to think well, even the ability to be a moral person and to choose well, all of these require support from the surrounding society. And so they have the image often of the person as like a plant. I mean, something that is fairly sturdy, that has a definite structure, but that is always in need of support from the surrounding society. And the political leader in that image is like the gardener who has to tend the plant. Now, I think if you see human life that way, and you think of the role of politics as providing conditions of support for all the richly diverse elements in a full human life, that does have very definite consequences for the way you're going to think.
What has long excited me about the ancient Greeks, from the first time I read Edith Hamilton to Professor Osmond at the University of Texas, is that they were carrying on a vital discussion about the kind of culture they wanted, the kind of public society they were after, a public culture and society that stood for something. The debate that was going on in those times among the philosophers was exhilarating. Did you find that?
I think that it's extraordinary the way the whole society was involved in this debate. And if you even think about the performance of the tragedies were not performed like going to a Broadway show where you go into this darkened auditorium and you see somebody up there in the stage and you think, well, what has this got to do with me? But the tragedies were a civic festival where all citizens came in there and they looked across the theater at their fellow citizens and they saw this as a scene for feeling and thinking about the life of the city.
Politics was really a conversation between the artists, the politicians, the statesmen, and the people being in the audience, the congregation, so to speak.
I think this is an attitude towards literature that, to some extent, we've lost, and that it's very important to recover. Because I really do think that these poetic works, with their richness of exploration of emotional experience, of the various ways in which human life is vulnerable to disaster, that in their very shape, they're doing something in ethics that we need to look at.